My husband threw me out of the house for the woman he was cheating on me with. He forgot that this house and the company were mine. Watch how I put him on the street in 48 hours. In the silence of the vast living room, the sound of something being thrown echoed like a gunshot. A large manila envelope landed sharply on the Italian marble coffee table. It slid a short way, bumping against the crystal vase, holding the white lilies I had just arranged that morning. "Sign it. Now." James Harrison stood there. His breathing was heavy, his face flushed, not with shame, but with a fury he felt entitled to unleash. The sleeves of the Armani suit I had bought him for his birthday last month were slightly wrinkled, a sign that he had vented his emotions somewhere else before coming home. I slowly set down my cup of Earl Grey tea. The delicate clink of porcelain against the saucer was a stark contrast to my husband's violent demeanor. I looked at him, then at the envelope. The divorce papers. My voice was flat. "Not just divorce papers, Catherine. It's your one-way ticket out of this hellhole of a marriage," James snapped. He loosened his tie with a sharp tug. "I'm sick of it. Sick of your coldness, the way you keep this house like a museum, and most importantly, I've found someone who actually respects me as a man." I wasn't surprised. Of course, there was another woman. The cheap vanilla perfume that had been clinging to his suits when he walked through the front door for the past 2 months had already alerted me. "Her name is Amber," James continued, as if he had either read my mind or wanted to twist the knife deeper. "And she needs security, so this is security. I want you out of this house." He leaned forward, placing both hands on the marble table, glaring at me with a threatening look that seemed borrowed from a gangster movie. "I'm giving you 48 hours, Catherine. 48 hours to pack your personal things, clothes, makeup, whatever, but the furniture, the paintings, and this house are mine. My new fiancée, Amber, deserves this house. She wants to redecorate next week." I glanced around the living room, at the 20-foot ceilings, the baccarat crystal chandelier, the marble floor specially imported from Tuscany. James thought this house was his because for the last 5 years of our marriage, I had let him believe he was the king of this castle. I let his ego grow, watering it with compliments and white lies that his CEO salary was enough to maintain our lifestyle. The truth was, James's salary barely covered the property taxes on this penthouse. "James..." My voice was soft but cold. "Do you really want to do this? Kick me out in 48 hours? "Of course," he replied arrogantly. "Don't even think about a settlement. The company is doing great thanks to my blood and sweat, and I've paid for this house every month from our joint account. You're just a housewife who got lucky marrying a successful man, so sign, pack, and get out. If not, I'll call building security to have you removed in 2 days." I looked at him. There was a cruel satisfaction in his eyes. He was enjoying this moment. He felt he had the power, that he had won. Slowly, the corners of my lips curved upward. It wasn't a smile of fear or sadness. It was the faint smile of a chess player who sees their opponent move their queen to the wrong square, opening the path to checkmate. "All right," I replied calmly. "I accept. 48 hours. That's more than enough time," James snorted. Thinking I had surrendered. He didn't know that in the next 48 hours, I wouldn't just be leaving this house. I would ensure that by the time I walked through that door, there wouldn't be a single roof left over James's head in all of New York City. "Good. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Amber is coming over soon to see her new home." James turned and left, leaving me alone with the divorce papers. I glanced at the antique grandfather clock in the corner. 47 hours and 50 minutes remaining. The game had begun. An hour later, the doorbell chimed. James was in the shower. I could hear the water running upstairs. With quiet steps, I opened the heavy, custom-designed wooden door. On the threshold stood a young woman, likely in her mid-22s. She was pretty, I'll give her that. Perfectly blown-out blonde hair. A tight red dress, a little too low-cut for a daytime visit. She looked me up and down, her eyes scanning my appearance, dressed in a simple silk house dress without a single piece of flashy jewelry. "Are you the maid?" "Oh, wait, you must be Catherine." Her voice was sharp and filled with disdain. "And you must be Amber," I replied, opening the door a little wider. "Please come in." Amber walked in without asking, her high heels clacking sharply on the marble. She immediately looked around, her eyes glittering with greed at the opulence of our foyer. "Wow," she muttered, but then sniffed. "A little dated. Too much beige and gold. It looks tacky. When I move in, I'm changing everything to a more modern, minimalist industrial style." She pointed to a large abstract painting on the wall. It was an original Rothko study worth as much as 2 of James's luxury cars. "That is really ugly. It'll have to go." I closed the door softly, reining in my emotions. "Would you care for something to drink, Miss Amber?" "An iced coffee, no sugar," she ordered without even looking at me, as if I were a waitress at a coffee shop. She walked into the living room, touching our Italian leather sofa with hands full of costume jewelry rings. I went to the kitchen. There, Mrs. Gable, our loyal housekeeper who had worked for my family since I was a child, looked at me with tear-filled eyes. She must have overheard the earlier altercation. "Ma'am," she whispered, her voice trembling. Mister is going too far." "Shh." I put a finger to my lips. "No tears. Prepare an iced coffee for our guest, and activate all the security cameras in the house on high-definition audio recording mode. Right now." Mrs. Gable's eyes widened for a moment. Then, wiping away her tears, she nodded with determination. She knew that when I gave specific instructions, I was up to something. I returned to the living room with a tray holding the iced coffee and some snacks. Just then, James was coming down the stairs. His hair was damp, and he was wearing a comfortable polo shirt. His face lit up when he saw Amber. "Baby!" James exclaimed, opening his arms. Amber ran to him and threw herself into his embrace. Right in front of me. "James, the house is huge, but the taste is so old-fashioned. We'll have to renovate everything. Anything for you, my love," James said, kissing her forehead. He shot a glance at me. His look was cold. "Catherine, don't just stand there. Leave the drinks and go up to your room. We need some privacy." I placed the tray carefully on the table. Amber picked up her glass, took a sip, and grimaced. A little bitter, but whatever. She sat on my husband's lap on a single sofa, speaking in a baby voice. "When will the papers be ready? I want to have a housewarming party soon. My friends will be so jealous." "She'll be gone the day after tomorrow," James replied nonchalantly, his hand around Amber's waist. 48 hours. After that, this house is officially our palace. The deed isn't in my name yet, but that's a simple formality. My lawyer says since it's the house we live in together, I have full rights to it. I was standing near the threshold to the dining room, half hidden, but close enough to hear everything. My phone in my dress pocket had been recording the whole time. "But that woman won't ask for anything, will she?" Amber asked worriedly. "And the Mercedes she drives will be ours too, right?" "Don't worry," James laughed dismissively. "Catherine is clueless about legal or financial matters. She's never worked a day in her life. She's just lived comfortably off my salary. She has no money to hire a good lawyer. At most, she'll go back to her parents' house in some small town in Ohio." I had to suppress a laugh. My parents in Ohio. My father was a diplomat in Switzerland, and my mother was one of the biggest art collectors in Southeast Asia. James had never met them. My excuse was that they were busy, to hide the fact that they never approved of my marriage to a man they called a gold-digging social climber. "That's great," Amber giggled. "I can't wait to be Mrs. Harrison." They kissed. It was a disgusting scene, but a very useful one. I turned off the recording in my pocket and headed to my study, hidden behind the library. They thought they had won. They had no idea that every word they had just spoken was another nail in their own financial coffin. 45 hours remaining. The clock ticked into the early morning hours. The house was silent. James and Amber were asleep. Ironically, Amber had insisted on sleeping in the master bedroom, implicitly kicking me out. James, on the other hand, whether out of a shred of shame or fear of breaking the rules too quickly, had settled into the guest room. I was in my study, the one space to which only I had the key. This room was perfectly soundproofed. I switched on a dim desk lamp and opened a safe hidden behind a shelf of old encyclopedias. Inside was not cash, but a stack of documents bearing the logo of a multinational corporation, Davenport Holdings. My mother's maiden name was Davenport, and that name controlled 40% of the commercial real estate in Manhattan. I took out a special phone that I only used for business matters. A phone James never knew existed. I dialed the number on speed dial 1. Yes, Director Davenport. The voice on the other end was sharp and alert, despite it being midnight. It was Mr. Sterling, head of the legal department at Davenport Holdings, and my personal attorney. Mr. Sterling, I apologize for disturbing you at this hour. My voice had become clipped and authoritative, a far cry from the submissive wife's voice James was used to hearing. Not a disturbance at all, Director. Is it urgent? Activate the Black Swan Protocol on James Harrison's assets, I ordered. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Are you certain, Director? That protocol will strip him of everything, including his CEO position at Innovative Solutions. I'm certain, I replied coldly. He has violated clauses 14 and 15 of our marital agreement, adultery, and attempted unilateral forced appropriation of assets. I have video and audio evidence from the security cameras today. I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on the other end. Accessing the data. Yes, according to the secret investment agreement Mr. Harrison signed 5 years ago, thinking it was a mere formality with an angel investor, the ownership of his shares in Innovatic was subject to vesting conditions tied to performance and moral integrity. With the evidence you have, we can trigger the unilateral share buyback clause at zero par value for gross breach of contract. Do it. Block his access to company accounts tomorrow morning. And Mr. Sterling? Yes, Director. Verify the deed status for this penthouse. Ensure the block is already active that prevents any notary from proceeding with a title change without my fingerprint. That was processed automatically, Director. The deed for the Park Avenue penthouse is in the name of Catherine Davenport. It is a separately inherited asset. Your husband has no claim to a single dollar. Even if he made improvements to the property, they are considered a voluntary gift. I smiled with satisfaction. Good. One more thing. Contact our bank manager and freeze our joint account. The funds transferred from my personal account must be returned to my trust account. Leave only Mr. Harrison's salary for this month in that account. Understood. It will be executed at 8 a.m. when the banks open. Do you require anything else? Prepare an eviction team for 40 hours from now. I want the police and a court officer to accompany them. I don't want any physical drama that could pose a risk to me. Understood, Director. Get some rest. I hung up the phone. I leaned back in my leather chair, looking at a photo of our wedding that was still on the desk. I once hid my identity because I wanted to be loved for who I was. I wanted James to develop his confidence, to feel like a successful head of the household. I injected funds into his company through a shell corporation. I got him major projects through my uncle's contacts, all without his knowledge. I let him think he was a genius. But genius without humility breeds a monster. And now, that monster was trying to devour its creator. I stood up. I had one more thing to do that night, an asset inventory. 40 hours remaining. The large penthouse was filled with valuables, but James was too foolish to know what had real value. He believed an object's worth came from the size of its logo. He was proud of his 80-inch television and his leather sofa, but he was blind to the value of art. I moved like a ghost through my own home. I brought a special hard-shell suitcase up from the basement. My first target was the wall in the central hallway. 3 paintings hung there. To James, they were just strange, abstract pictures I had bought at a gallery in Soho. To a collector, they were original early studies by Mark Rothko. I carefully took them down and replaced them with high-quality replicas I had prepared in advance at a secret storage unit. I had commissioned them 6 months ago, when I first started suspecting James's infidelity. The difference between the original and the fake was nearly imperceptible to an untrained eye. James would never notice. Next, the jewelry. I entered the walk-in closet next to the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I could hear Amber's snores from the bedroom. With very quiet steps, I opened the wall safe behind the mirror. James knew the combination to this safe. Inside was a diamond set, a Rolex watch, and some gold bars. But what James didn't know was that this safe had a false bottom. I lifted the velvet lining at the bottom of the safe. Underneath were the real documents: the deed to the penthouse, the title for James's sports car, which was actually purchased in my company's name, passports, and treasury bonds. I took everything out and then did a little mischief. I took James's Patek Philippe watch, a gift for his birthday last year that cost $150,000. I put it in my suitcase and replaced it with a high-quality replica I had bought online on a whim. The appearance was identical. The weight, too. But the internal mechanism would barely last a week. Finally, I went to the garage. The cars were neatly parked, James's Porsche and my Mini Cooper. I opened the hood of the Porsche and, with a technique my car enthusiast father had taught me, I pulled out a small fuse. The fuel pump fuse. Tomorrow morning, that car wouldn't start. I wanted to see his face when his symbol of pride refused to cooperate. After securing all the valuables in the hardshell suitcase, I took it to the back service entrance. There, my loyal personal driver, Arthur, was waiting with an unmarked black van. "Take this to the apartment on Sutton Place, Arthur. The key is in the lockbox as always," I whispered. "Understood, miss. Will you be all right here?" Arthur asked with concern. "I will be perfectly fine, Arthur. The real show begins tomorrow." The van drove away silently. I went back inside a house that now seemed a little emptier to my eyes, but which to James would still look luxurious. The entire lifeblood of this home, its liquid assets and valuable art, was already gone. What remained was just an empty shell that would soon collapse and crush James. I went back to my study and lay down on the couch. I needed some sleep. I had to act again tomorrow. 36 hours remaining. The morning light filtered through the blinds of the study. I woke up feeling refreshed. Strangely, there were no tears or confusion, only a sharp focus. I showered and dressed carefully. I wore an elegant, yet understated navy blue knee-length dress. I went down to the dining room, where Mrs. Gable had already prepared breakfast: steak and eggs, James's favorite dish. James and Amber came down 10 minutes later. They looked like a couple who had just won the lottery. Amber was wearing my silk kimono. She must have taken it from the master bedroom closet. The audacity, but I let her. The higher they fly, the harder they fall. "Good morning, soon-to-be ex," James greeted me mockingly. He sat at the head of the table. "Did you sign the papers?" I placed a plate of steak and eggs in front of him. "They're on the living room table." James immediately forgot about breakfast. He dragged Amber into the living room. I followed calmly. James grabbed the envelope, took out the papers, and flipped to the last page. His eyes widened when he saw my neat signature on the dotted line. "Finally!" he exclaimed, holding the paper up like a trophy. "Look, baby, she's surrendered. This house is ours." Amber shrieked with joy and hugged James tightly. "Oh, James, you're amazing." "Goodbye, Catherine." James looked at me. A triumphant smirk adorned his face. "Well done, Catherine. Knowing your place. Since you've cooperated, I'll be gracious. You can use a company truck tomorrow to move your things. But remember, not a single appliance or piece of furniture. Those are my assets." "Thank you for your generosity, James," I replied dryly. "I'll start packing today." "Oh, and one more thing," James said, pointing at Amber. "Amber wants to use your dressing room now, so clear out your vanity within the hour. She needs space for her makeup." "Of course," I replied. "Make yourselves at home." James, his spirits high, went back to the dining room to devour his breakfast. Amber ran upstairs, excited at the prospect of conquering her new territory. I stood silently in the living room, watching James's back. He hadn't read the fine print. He hadn't read Section 2 on page 4 about the division of assets. He also didn't notice that under my signature I had dated the document for the previous day, along with my legal counsel's initials, which technically invalidated it if he tried to use it to evict me before a court judgment. But most importantly, he didn't know that my signature was the trigger. The moment he signed the papers and took them, Mr. Sterling would receive a notification. I had just sent a coded text message. "Signature complete." It was the signal to initiate Phase 2, the total freeze. I watched James devour the steak and eggs. Enjoy your last meal as a rich man, James. This afternoon, you won't even have money to buy a bottle of water. I headed upstairs to pack the few clothes I had left. Mentally, I started a countdown. In a few hours, James would go to the office, and that's when his real world would come crashing down. 34 hours remaining. After dropping Amber at a shopping mall, she had made the excuse that she wanted to cheer herself up by window shopping. Though perhaps she was already starting to have doubts about him, James drove towards the Innovatech Solutions offices on Park Avenue. He needed answers. Why had all his cards been declined? Why wasn't the bank answering his calls? His mind was in chaos. He concluded it must be an error in the national banking system or that a hacker had attacked his accounts. Not for a moment did he think I could be the cause. In his eyes, Catherine was just a technophobic housewife. James parked in his reserved spot, marked CEO James Harrison. He strode into the skyscraper's lobby with an air of importance, trying to regain the dignity he had lost at the restaurant. He approached the access turnstiles and swiped his ID card. Beep beep, red light. The metal barrier didn't turn. James frowned. He swiped the card again, harder. Beep beep, red light. What is wrong today? James cursed. He saw the line of employees behind him growing. Some were murmuring. "Mr. Ramos," James shouted to the head of lobby security, "open this for me manually. I think my card is broken." The burly man, who normally bowed respectfully when James passed, this time stood firm at his post. He approached, but not to open the gate. His face was expressionless. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison. Your card isn't broken, it's deactivated," Mr. Ramos said firmly. "Deactivated? I own this company. Who dares deactivate my card?" James yelled. His voice echoed in the vast marble lobby. "Orders from the board of directors and the majority shareholder, sir. As of this afternoon, you have been barred from accessing the premises." James laughed, a laugh that sounded hysterical. "Majority shareholder? I own 20% of the shares. That anonymous investor has never interfered with management. This is a coup!" At that moment, the elevator opened. Miss Diaz, James's personal secretary for 3 years, walked out carrying a medium-sized cardboard box. Miss Diaz, who normally smiled sweetly at him and called him a genius boss, now looked at him with strange, cold eyes. She passed through the turnstiles and handed the box to James. "Your personal effects, Mr. Harrison," Miss Diaz said in an official tone. "The family photo, your mug, and the phone charger. The laptop and work documents have been retained by the audit team." "Miss Diaz, what is the meaning of this? Explain it to me," James said, grabbing her shoulder. Mr. Ramos quickly pushed James's hand away. "Do not touch the staff, Mr. Harrison." Miss Diaz adjusted her jacket. "Davenport Holdings, which owns 80% of Innovatech shares, has activated an emergency clause. You have been temporarily suspended from your position as CEO for alleged misappropriation of company funds for personal gain and gross ethical misconduct. Davenport Holdings." James was speechless. The name sounded familiar. The name of a real estate giant. Since when were they his investors? He thought his investor was a foreign consortium. "Who is the chairman?" "I need to speak with him." "Miss Catherine Davenport," Miss Diaz replied calmly. That name hit James like a hammer. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Catherine," he whispered. "My wife. Catherine, your ex-wife. Mr. Harrison, according to the papers you yourself threw on the table this morning," Miss Diaz corrected sharply. "And for your information, the Porsche you parked out front is a company asset. The legal department has already called a tow truck. We recommend you return home by taxi." Miss Diaz turned and went back inside, leaving James like a statue, clutching a box with his own trinkets. The employees who once flattered him now walked past him with their heads down or pretending to look at their phones. James felt naked, diminished. Catherine's maiden name was Davenport. How could he have forgotten? How could he have been so stupid as to not connect Catherine with Davenport Holdings? He had always thought Catherine was just the daughter of a wealthy, carefree family, never that she was the owner of the corporate giant that held his leash. 2 security guards approached. "Please leave the lobby, sir, or we will have to call the NYPD." Staggering, James walked outside. The scorching New York sun seemed to burn his skin. He saw his prized yellow Porsche being hooked up to a tow truck. He wanted to scream, but he had no strength. He reached into his pockets to call an Uber, but remembered he had no data, and the credit card registered in the app would already be canceled. James, clutching the box with his own photo, which now seemed like a mockery, stood on the edge of Park Avenue and raised his hand to hail a yellow cab. 26 hours remaining. While James struggled to get a taxi in rush-hour traffic, Amber was living her own little apocalypse in the parking garage of Saks Fifth Avenue. Amber strode elegantly towards the VIP parking area. She had only been window shopping, as the nearly maxed-out credit card she used for lunch didn't allow her to buy anything. She was looking forward to getting into the white Mercedes C-Class that James had lent her a month ago. It was her status symbol, the proof that she had conquered a rich man. But when she reached spot, a 12, it was empty. Amber blinked, checked the column number. Yes, A12. "It's been stolen," she panicked. She ran immediately to the parking security office. "Sir, my car has disappeared." "A white Mercedes, license plate BQU-CK80, she yelled at the employee. The employee calmly checked the data on his computer. "One moment, ma'am. License plate. BQU-CK80. Ah, here it is." The vehicle was not stolen but recovered by its official owner with a spare key about 20 minutes ago. "What?" "The official owner is my boyfriend, James Harrison. He wouldn't take it without telling me." "I'm sorry, ma'am." According to the registration data presented by the recovery team, the owner of the vehicle is a subsidiary of the Davenport Group. They brought an asset recovery order for unauthorized use by a third party. Amber fell silent. Her slow brain began to piece together the puzzle. Davenport Group. She had heard James mention it as one of his major clients. But why would they repossess James's car? Amber tried to call James. "The number you are trying to reach is not available." She tried again. Same message. Amber stomped her foot. People started to stare at her. A woman dressed in expensive clothes, screaming in the security office. "And how am I supposed to get home now?" She snapped at the guard as if it were his fault. "There's a taxi stand at the west entrance, ma'am," the guard replied dryly. Amber stormed out, her face red. She imagined the humiliation of having to wait for a normal yellow cab mixed in with the rest of the people while wearing a Gucci dress she had bought last month with James's card. In the taxi, which smelled of orange air freshener, Amber finally managed to speak with James. She had to call his regular phone number, as his WhatsApp seemed not to be working. She didn't know James had no data. "Hello? James? Where the hell are you?" Amber screamed as soon as the call connected. "Don't shout." James's voice sounded tired and angry. "I have my own problems. The company towed my car." "They took my car too. They said it belonged to some company or something. You said it was yours. It's complicated, Amber. I'll explain at home." "Come home now. To that hellish house. I'm hungry, James. I want a nice dinner. Just come, Amber. Catherine will have made something at home." James hung up. Amber stared at her phone screen in disbelief. Catherine had cooked? So they were going to eat food prepared by the ex-wife they had just kicked out. The situation was becoming increasingly surreal. Amber began to feel that the ship she was sailing on was sinking, and she had no life vest. But she had no other choice. With no money, no car, and having already sublet her apartment because she was sure she would be moving into James's place, she was trapped. 22 hours remaining. The house smelled delicious, not of air freshener, but of the appetizing aroma of rosemary, garlic, and roasted meat. I was in the kitchen, wearing a pristine white apron over my house dress. The dining room table was perfectly set. Linen tablecloth, silverware inherited from my grandmother, and lit candles. The front door burst open. James entered. His shirt was soaked with sweat under the arms. His face was a mess, like a crumpled piece of paper. He wasn't carrying his briefcase. It had obviously been confiscated, just that stupid box. 10 minutes later, Amber walked in. She looked just as disheveled, her hair flattened by the New York humidity, and her makeup slightly smudged. They met in the middle of the living room, looking at each other with a mixture of exhaustion and confusion. "Welcome," I greeted them from the dining room. My voice was cheerful. "You're just in time. The beef Wellington just came out of the oven." James looked at me with an indescribable expression. There was anger, but also fear. "Catherine, what did you do at the company?" "Let's have dinner first, James," I interrupted gently. "You never talk business on an empty stomach, right? That was one of your rules." I sat in the chair at the head of the table, the host's seat. Normally James sat there, but this time I took it. James had no choice but to sit to my right, and Amber, hesitantly, to my left. I poured water into their glasses, the expensive red wine I had already put away. They didn't deserve it. "Catherine," James's voice trembled. He didn't touch his food. "My secretary says you own Innovatech. That's a lie, right? You're trying to scare me into canceling the divorce?" I calmly cut a piece of meat from my plate. "Eat, Amber. It's imported Wagyu beef. It might be the last time you eat meat of this quality." Amber glared at me, but her stomach rumbled. She began to eat voraciously, forgetting her manners. I turned to James. James, where do you think your startup capital came from 5 years ago? From your parents' inheritance, who are farmers in a small town, or from your savings that you always spent on tuning cars?" James was silent. His face turned pale. "That capital was invested by me through my uncle's venture capital fund. It was I who got you your first clients, and it was I who made sure your financial audits came out clean. Even though you often siphoned off small amounts of money for football bets." James clenched his fists. "You've been deceiving me all this time, making me believe I was the one who was successful." "I wanted my husband to have self-esteem," I replied sharply. "I gave you a stage, James, but you used that stage to spit on the audience, and it turns out that audience was me." "Give me back my access," James shouted, slamming the table. The plates rattled. "I built that company. I worked day and night." "Day and night?" I laughed softly, a cold laugh that chilled to the bone. "According to your phone's GPS data and the company's expense records, you spent 40% of your work time in 5-star hotels, spas, and karaoke bars with fake clients." "That's not working, James. That's stealing." "I'll sue you." "With what money?" I asked nonchalantly. "Your account is empty. Your credit card's canceled. Your car confiscated. Even your top lawyer from the Cravath firm is my father's golf buddy. I doubt he'll even take your call." James fell silent. Reality began to seep into his thick skull. He really had nothing. Amber stopped eating. She suddenly dropped her fork. "Wait a minute. So James is actually broke?" "Completely." "He's not broke, Amber," I corrected. "He's been restored to his factory settings." Amber looked at James with a new kind of hatred. "You said you were a tycoon. You said this house was yours." "This is just a misunderstanding, Amber," James said, trying to take her hand, but Amber pulled it away. "Well," I stood up. "The dinner show is over. Finish eating and go to bed. Tomorrow is an important day. Your deadline ends in 24 hours. I left James in despair, and Amber, who had started calculating her losses, in the dining room. The atmosphere between them was now toxic. The foundation of their relationship, built on money and lust, crumbled as soon as the money disappeared. 15 hours remaining. 2 a.m. The huge house was plunged into total darkness. I made sure James and Amber had retired to their respective rooms. An hour ago, the sound of their fight had reached my room downstairs. Amber was shouting fraud, and James was shouting about loyalty. A very boring drama. Now it was time for the isolation phase. From my firmly locked room, I sat in front of my laptop. I accessed the house's smart home system. Phase 1. Cut the internet connection. I deactivated the main router. The Wi-Fi for the entire house was cut off. In this age, without the internet, a human being is like losing oxygen. Since they no longer had data, they couldn't call an Uber, contact friends on WhatsApp, or read the news. Phase 2. Communication isolation. I used a legally purchased portable signal jammer to protect my privacy, which blocked the cell phone signal in a 50-meter radius. Now their phones were just useless pieces of glass and metal. No one could make or receive calls, except from the landline in my room. Phase 3, digital lockdown. I changed the passwords for the front door, the garage, and the entrance gate. The old password was 123456. James was really lazy. The new password? The date of our divorce. Phase 4, temperature control. This was my personal touch. I set the air conditioning in the master bedroom, where Amber was sleeping, to the lowest temperature, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Let her freeze. On the other hand, I completely turned off the air conditioning in the guest room where James was sleeping. That night, New York was a furnace. Let him sweat in his own sins. Done. I closed the laptop. The house was now a prison for them and a fortress for me. When they woke up in the morning, they would realize they were trapped, no car, no communication, no money, and even physically uncomfortable. The psychological pressure would reach its peak. Human nature reveals itself when cornered. I wanted to see how great Amber's love was when James couldn't offer her even comfort. And I wanted to see how great James's pride was when he had to beg me for a glass of water. I lay down in bed. I was going to sleep very soundly that night. Outside, the night wind howled silently. The grandfather clock continued to tick-tock, tick-tock, towards total annihilation, 23 hours remaining. The New York sun had not yet fully risen, but its heat was already beginning to filter through the ventilation ducts. In the guest room, James woke up gasping as if he had just run a marathon. Sweat soaked his t-shirt, sticking disgustingly to the skin on his back. He fumbled for the air conditioning remote with his eyes half closed and pressed the power button several times in frustration. It was off. The indicator light on the AC unit was dark. James groaned and threw the remote on the floor. He felt like he was being roasted alive in a concrete oven. Meanwhile, across the hall in the luxurious master bedroom, Amber was waking up in a completely opposite state. She was shivering violently under the thick goose-down comforter, which normally felt luxurious but now felt like a slab of ice. Her lips were blue and her teeth were chattering. She saw that the AC control panel on the wall read 60 degrees Fahrenheit. With the power cool mode locked, she tried to raise the temperature, but the panel did not respond to her touch. It was locked from the central system. "Damn it!" Amber screamed in a broken voice. They both came out of their respective rooms at almost the same time. They met face to face. James, soaked in sweat and smelly, and Amber, wrapped in the thick comforter like a huge silk cocoon. Amber's face was pale and her nose was running. They turned their heads towards the second-floor balcony. There I was, sitting comfortably in a rattan chair, enjoying the naturally cool morning breeze. On the small table next to me was a cup of single-origin Colombian coffee that was steaming aromatically, along with a butter croissant that had just been delivered by my regular delivery person through the side door, to which only I had the key. "Good morning." I greeted them cheerfully without looking up from the tablet I was reading. "Did you sleep well?" "What did you do to the air conditioning, Catherine?" James yelled, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "My room was a furnace. And mine was the North Pole," Amber added, sneezing loudly. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitter, acidic aroma stimulate my senses before answering. "Oh, that. I suppose the smart home system is adjusting priorities. The electricity bill is expensive, James, and since your account is empty, I have to save. It prioritizes the comfort of the one who pays the bills. It's fair, isn't it?" James took an aggressive step forward. His face was flushed. "Turn the internet on right now." "I can't even check my emails. There's no cell service in this house. I can't open Instagram," Amber complained. "You know, there's life beyond a phone screen," I replied nonchalantly, turning a page of digital news on my tablet, which was connected to my personal Wi-Fi network, a hidden network they didn't know about. "But if you need something to entertain yourselves, I suggest you start packing. You only have 23 hours left." "I want to take a hot shower," Amber demanded. "I'm freezing." "Go ahead," I said with a lopsided smile. "But if I remember correctly, the water heater for the master bedroom is connected to the gas system, and the technician took the tank this morning for non-payment." Amber shrieked in frustration and stomped her foot, running back to the bathroom, perhaps hoping for a miracle. The sound of a cold water spray was heard, followed by Amber's shriek of surprise. A few seconds later, James looked at me with a murderous gaze. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Immensely," I replied frankly, looking him straight in the eye. "I used to do everything possible to make you comfortable. I adjusted the temperature of the house. I made sure the internet was fast for your games, that there was hot water. You never noticed because you took it for granted. Now I've stopped being your genie in a lamp, James." "Welcome to reality," James snorted and turned towards the stairs. "I'm going to the bank. I'm going to fix this mess you've created." "Don't think you've won." "Without a car?" I asked. "And without a taxi app?" James stopped for a moment, his back stiffened. Then he continued stubbornly on his way. "I'll walk to the building entrance and take a cab if I have to. I don't care." I watched him go down the stairs with heavy steps. The man who yesterday arrogantly threw the divorce papers now had to walk a mile in the New York morning sun to find cheap transportation. I went back to my tablet. The stock chart for Davenport Holdings was up that morning. Life went on, 20 hours remaining. James returned 3 hours later. He looked even more pitiful than when he left. The shirt, which had been soaked in sweat from the night, was now stained with street dust and sun sweat. His face was red, and his hair was matted. He hadn't easily found a taxi, and the one he did find refused to take him because he didn't have enough cash. Knowing there was a problem, he made one last attempt at an ATM in a convenience store, but the result was the same. The card was swallowed by the machine. James entered the house and went straight to the landline phone that was on the console table in the living room. It was the only means of communication that worked. I was sitting on the living room sofa, painting my nails a blood-red color. Mrs. Gable, pretending to dust, or rather, keeping an eye on things just in case, watched me. James picked up the receiver with trembling hands and dialed the VIP service number for his bank. "Hello, this is James Harrison," he shouted into the receiver. "Why was my card swallowed? Why has all my access been blocked?" I could hear the faint voice of the customer service representative on the other end. Calm, but procedural. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison. According to our data, all accounts in your name are currently frozen for investigation at the request of the financial authorities in connection with a complaint for corporate embezzlement." "Embezzlement? What are you talking about?" "That's my money." The complaint was filed by the legal department of Davenport Holdings and Innovatech Solutions. A suspicious flow of funds was detected to the account of a third party unrelated to the business. James fell silent. His eyes went upstairs, where Amber was. Flow of funds to a third party. The money he transferred every month to Amber for the apartment, the handbags, and the beauty treatments. "But my other personal account, that account no longer has a balance, sir. An automatic debit has been made to cover the outstanding debts on the company card and the penalty for termination of the investment contract. Your current balance is negative $15,000. The receiver fell from James's hand. It swayed, hitting the leg of the table. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was like the heartbeat of his financial death sentence. Negative. He wasn't just broke, he was in debt. James turned slowly and looked at me. His face was pale, as if all the blood had been drained from it. "You," he whispered, "you've ruined my life." I blew on my freshly painted nails. "I correct you, James. You have ruined your life. You used company money to finance your prostitute. In the business world, that's called embezzlement. It's a felony, James. You could go to jail." "I'm your husband. Ex-husband," I replied coldly. "And as the majority shareholder, I have a fiduciary duty to protect my company's assets from a thief, even if that thief slept in the same bed as me for 5 years. James collapsed onto the marble floor. His legs gave out. The money, the foundation of his arrogance, was gone without a trace. He realized he had always been on a stage that I had built, and I had just pulled the rug out from under his feet. Suddenly, Amber came down the stairs. She had showered, I don't know how, with cold water. She was wearing her best dress and dragging a small suitcase. "James," Amber called. Her voice was demanding. I asked the neighbor for their phone and called a cab. It was a hassle to jump the fence. The taxi is waiting at the building entrance. The strict doorman won't let it in. We're going to a hotel right now. I can't stay here anymore." James looked at Amber with empty eyes. "Come on, James, pay for the taxi with the emergency card you keep in your secret wallet," Amber urged him. James laughed, a dry, desperate laugh. "Emergency card?" "That card is also canceled, Amber. All of them. I'm over $100,000 in debt." Amber stopped on the last step. The suitcase in her hand slowly fell. "What do you mean?" Her voice turned shrill. "I'm broke, Amber, completely. Catherine has taken everything." Amber turned to me. I just shrugged and smiled kindly. "Don't look at me. I've only taken back what's mine." The atmosphere in the living room changed. It was no longer a fight between James and Catherine. It was the moment when reality hit the fantasy of Amber and James's love. 18 hours remaining. What broke the silence wasn't crying, but Amber's explosion of anger. The mask of a sweet, pampered woman she had worn in front of James shattered completely. Her true, calculating nature came to light. "Broke?" Amber hissed. Her eyes narrowed, fixed on James, who was still slumped on the floor. "You said you were a business genius. You said the company was all yours. You lied to me." James lifted his head. His face was pathetic. "Amber, listen to me. This is just temporary. I can recover. I have the technology, the contacts." "What contacts?" Amber interrupted sharply. "They've taken your car. They've blocked your cards. You can't even pay the electricity bill. Do you think I want to live with a beggar?" "Amber," James stood up, his pride wounded. "Watch what you say. I did all this for us. I divorced my wife for you." "And who asked you to?" Amber screamed. Her high-pitched voice filled the room. "I just asked you to buy me an apartment, James, not to start a world war with your rich wife. If I had known you were just a puppet funded by your wife, I wouldn't have wasted the last year with you." Those words hit James harder than a slap. He staggered back a step. "So all this time it was about the money?" "Of course," Amber laughed cynically, a laugh that sent shivers down your spine. "Love has to eat too, James. Love needs skincare and trips to Europe. Do you think I want to live with a bankrupt divorcee with a criminal record for embezzlement? No way." I sat silently on my sofa, enjoying the show as if it were a live television drama. It was incredibly satisfying to watch their true love disintegrate in minutes as soon as the money variable was removed from the equation. "Gold-digging tramp," James hissed. His eyes began to fill with tears of betrayal. "I bought you Hermes bags, watches, diamonds. And all of that is evidence of embezzlement, isn't it?" Amber retorted quickly. She looked at the suitcase in her hand and then at me. "Mrs. Harrison, if I return some of these things, you won't report me for receiving stolen goods, will you?" I laughed softly. Amber was smart too. Her survival instinct was strong. "That's up to you, Miss Amber. How quickly you leave this house and how cooperative you are later with my audit team." "Amber!" James shouted in disbelief. "Now you're taking her side?" Amber ignored James. She looked at me with hopeful eyes. "I'm leaving right now. I don't want to get involved in your affairs. James is a liar. I'm a victim here too. Go," I said, waving my hand. "The front door isn't locked, but it's heavy. You'll have to push." Amber nodded quickly, picked up her suitcase, and crossed the living room without giving James a single glance. "Amber, wait!" James tried to follow her, grabbing her arm. Smack! A loud slap landed on James's cheek. Amber looked at him with disgust. "Don't touch me. Worry about your own situation." Amber left, slamming the front door behind her. James stood like a statue in the middle of the room. His cheek was red with the mark of the fingers of the woman he had, until yesterday, hailed as his soulmate. Now he was alone, truly alone. He turned slowly and looked at me. Tears of rage and despair streamed down his cheeks. His emotions were unstable. He was like a wounded, cornered beast. "Satisfied, Catherine?" he asked weakly, but his voice had a dangerous tremor. I stood up and smoothed my dress. "Not yet. There are still 18 hours left, and you're still in my house. 15 hours remaining." James didn't surrender meekly. Humiliation turned to recklessness. He walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water from the tap, as the mineral water dispenser was empty and his pride prevented him from asking me for it. He drank greedily. He returned to the living room with a different look, the look of a man who, feeling he has nothing left to lose, is capable of anything. "You think you can just throw me away like nothing?" James began to say in a low, threatening voice. He approached me. The distance between us was now barely 6 feet. Mrs. Gable, who had been watching from a corner of the dining room, moved forward with a broom in her hand, ready to protect. I gestured for her to calm down. I wasn't afraid of James. A man who has lost his power usually barks but doesn't bite. "Listen to me, Catherine," James said, pointing a finger in my face. "I know a lot of company secrets. I know about the ongoing projects. If you don't give me a settlement, say, about $500,000, and drop the criminal complaint, I will leak all of Innovatech's trade secrets to the competition. I'll ruin your company's reputation." I looked at him with pity. He really didn't understand who he was dealing with. "Empty threats, James," I replied calmly. "What secrets?" "The Miami Smart City project has already been awarded to another subsidiary of the Davenport Group. The source code for the logistics app project was secured last night by the central IT team." "What do you have? A list of client contacts?" "They are loyal to the money, James, not to you, and I have the money. Until a judge rules otherwise, legally I am your husband," James shouted, taking another step. "I have the right to half of the assets. Half of this house is mine. I will file a lawsuit for division of assets, and I will live here until the trial is over. Do you want to live in the same house killing each other for years?" That was his last card. He was trying to blackmail me using marriage law. I walked calmly to the sideboard in the corner and picked up a blue folder. It wasn't the same brown folder with the divorce papers from yesterday. It was another one. James, you have such a bad memory," I said as I opened the folder. "In 2019, 2 days before our wedding, at Mr. Robles' notary office on Sutton Place, you signed this." I held up the document. "Prenuptial agreement for separation of property." James frowned, trying to remember. "That was just a formality. Your father said it was better to have it separate for tax purposes. Read Clause 7, Section 2, I said, holding the paper up to his face. James squinted and read the text I was pointing to. "In the event that the marriage ends in divorce due to the infidelity, adultery of one of the parties, and this has been legally proven, the unfaithful party will automatically waive all right to claim on the community property formed during the marriage, and will also lose the right to the distribution of profits from any business operated with the capital of the other party during the marriage." James's face went from red to ashen gray. "And Clause 8, I continued cruelly. "The party whose infidelity is proven will be obliged to return, retroactively from the date of the marriage, the value of all capital and amenities provided by the injured party." I closed the folder with a sharp snap. "I have videos of you and Amber. I have audio recordings of your confession. I have the bank records of the transfers to Amber's account. Legally, James, not only will you get nothing, but you owe me the value of all the comforts you have enjoyed for the last 5 years. The rent for this house, the cars, the clothes, the food, everything." I took a step forward, reversing the threat. Now it was I who was pushing him back. "So, your offer of $500,000 is ridiculous. Rather, it is I who should be demanding from you. But I am being generous. If you leave quietly in the time you have left, maybe, just maybe, I will forget your personal debt. But if you get stubborn and stay here," I brought my face close to his, "I will make sure you rot in jail for embezzlement, and when you get out, you will still owe me thousands of dollars, a debt you will have to pay until you die." James backed away until his back hit the wall. His legs were trembling. He saw a demon in my eyes, or perhaps the Grim Reaper who would take his future. He couldn't answer. Sheer terror had gripped his throat. "Good," I whispered. "Save your strength for packing. You'll need it. 12 hours remaining." 4 p.m. James spent several hours in the guest room, perhaps crying, perhaps in shock. I didn't care. I was busy receiving visitors. A black luxury sedan pulled up in front of the building. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, got out, along with a neat-looking middle-aged woman, our family's notary, Mrs. Robles, and two burly men in black suits. My personal security team. James came downstairs when he heard the noise. His eyes were swollen. He saw the group enter the living room. "What now?" James asked weakly. "A final formality, Mr. Harrison," Mr. Sterling said. Polite but firm, opening his briefcase on the table. "By order of Director Davenport, we have come to read the Statement of Assets and officially serve you with the eviction order for the property." James sat in a chair in the corner. He looked small in front of these legal professionals. Missus Robles opened a large document with a green cover. "Property at Park Avenue, New York. Registry number 1024. Owner Catherine Davenport. Acquired by legacy in 2015. Inherited property. No disputes or registered encumbrances." Mrs. Robles looked at James over her glasses. "Mr. Harrison, legally, you have no right to reside here for a single day without the owner's permission. Your stay here was based solely on your wife's verbal permission, and today that permission has been revoked in writing." Mr. Sterling handed him a paper. "This is the order. You have until tomorrow at 9 a.m. Exactly 48 hours from the verbal ultimatum you yourself presented. If you exceed that time, we will file a complaint for trespassing with the NYPD. The police are already on notice." James looked at the paper. His hand didn't move to take it. "Why?" James's voice was a broken whisper. "Why are you so cruel, Catherine? What did I do to you to make you destroy me so completely?" That question silenced the room. Mr. Sterling and Mrs. Robles lowered their heads for a moment to give us a private space. I looked at James with expressionless eyes. There was no hatred left, only a void. "You ask why?" My voice was calm. "James, I gave you the world. I gave you love, support, capital, and dignity. I hid your flaws from my family. I defended you when my parents said you weren't worthy." I took a deep breath. "And in return, you not only betrayed me, but you humiliated me in my own home. You brought another woman to my bed. You tried to kick me out of the house I inherited from my grandmother. You didn't just break my heart, James. You tried to trample on my pride." I stood up straight. "I'm not cruel. I'm just a mirror. I reflect what you did to me. You threw a stone. I'm giving you back a mountain." James lowered his head deeply. His shoulders shook. He was crying. "Tears of regret? No. More likely tears of self-pity. Sign the acknowledgement of receipt of this order, Mr. Harrison," Mr. Sterling ordered, breaking the emotional moment. "It is to ensure that the eviction is carried out smoothly tomorrow." With a trembling hand, James signed the paper. His ink stroke was weak and messy. It was the signature of his defeat. Mr. Sterling and Mrs. Robles gathered their documents. "We will return tomorrow at 9 a.m. with the police director to ensure the eviction is carried out safely. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Robles," I said. They left, leaving James still sobbing quietly in a corner. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows inside the house. James's last night in the palace he once claimed as his own was approaching, and tomorrow he would turn to dust again. 11 hours remaining. 9 p.m. James's last night in the house fell heavily, as if the very ceiling of the house were crushing his shoulders. The electricity on the lower floor, where the guest room was still completely cut off. Catherine hadn't turned it back on. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the dim moonlight filtering through the large, uncurtained windows. James was curled up on the expensive living room sofa. His stomach rumbled loudly. He hadn't eaten anything since the beef Wellington the night before. The hunger was real, sharp, and humiliating. He tried to sleep, but his brain and his stomach conspired to keep him awake. From upstairs, a warm light spilled down the staircase. A faint scent of jasmine tea and luxury bath soap wafted through the air. That was Catherine's world. A bright, warm, and comfortable world. A world James had just rejected. And now the gates of that castle were firmly closed to him. James couldn't take it anymore. Hunger and thirst defeated his pride, Staggering, he went up the stairs towards the source of light. He found Catherine on the second-floor balcony, sitting comfortably in a rattan rocking chair, reading a thick, leather-bound book. A small reading lamp illuminated her serene face. On the small table next to her was a plate of freshly cut fruit and a cold, misted bottle of mineral water. James swallowed. His throat was dry. "Catherine." His voice came out broken. Catherine didn't turn her head. She turned a page of the book with a dry sound. "You're invading my space, James. The second floor is off limits." "I'm hungry, Catherine. I'm thirsty," James pleaded, lowering himself to his lowest point. "Please, just a little water." Catherine finally closed the book slowly. She looked at James. The man was completely broken, sunken eyes, chapped lips, a wrinkled shirt that smelled of sweat. There was nothing left of the arrogant CEO who was shouting yesterday. "There's tap water in the kitchen. The running water supply is still working. It won't be as cold as this mineral water, but it will be enough to survive," Catherine replied dryly. "Tap water." James looked at her in disbelief. During their 5 years of marriage, he had only drunk imported mineral water, or at least branded. "You're telling your husband to drink tap water?" "Ex-husband," Catherine corrected. "And besides, beggars can't be choosers, James. Before you married me, you drank boiled water in your small student apartment, didn't you? Think of it as a trip down memory lane." James knelt. Not for dramatic effect, but because his legs genuinely gave out. He crawled to Catherine's feet, trying to take her hand. "Catherine, I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I was an idiot. I was crazy. It was Amber. She manipulated me. She's a bad woman. I realize that now. My only love is you, Catherine." Catherine pulled her foot away as if avoiding something dirty. She looked at James with the gaze of a researcher, observing a disgusting specimen under a microscope. "Don't use the word love, James. You insult my intelligence," Catherine said coldly. "You didn't love me. You loved the comfort I provided you. And you don't hate Amber because she's bad. You hate her because she left you when you ran out of money. If I gave you $500,000 right now, you would run to find her." James shook his head vehemently. His crocodile tears splattered. "No, Catherine, no. I realize you are the best wife. Give me a second chance. We can start over. I promise to be an obedient husband. I'll do anything. Don't kick me out. I have no one." Catherine picked up the bottle of water from the table. James looked at her with hopeful eyes. Slowly, Catherine poured the contents of the bottle into a nearby plant pot. The clear water sank into the dry soil. "You see that plant pot, James?" Catherine asked softly. "It withered because I forgot to water it for a week, but as soon as I water it, it will revive. Its roots are still strong." Catherine looked James in the eye sharply. "But our marriage is not a withered plant pot. Our marriage is a tree that you chopped down, burned, and urinated on its ashes. Nothing can grow there again. Go drink tap water and sleep. Your time is running out." Catherine opened her book again, ignoring James's sobs that echoed in the luxurious hallway. For Catherine, that crying was not a sign of remorse, but the sound of a dying ego. 6 hours remaining. 2 a.m. James couldn't sleep. After drinking warm, chlorine-flavored water from the tap in the dark kitchen, he tried to find another way out. He needed an ally. He needed help. He remembered that in the drawer of the living room desk, which Catherine had torn apart during yesterday's audit, was his old physical phone book. Before everything was stored digitally on his now useless mobile phone, there were the important numbers of his old friends, college roommates, and his first business partners. With the help of the moonlight, James found the phone book. He took the only working means of communication, the landline phone, to a corner, sat on the floor, and began to dial. First call to his college roommate, Sergio, now a bank manager. "Hello? Who is this at 2 inches the morning?" Sergio's voice sounded sleepy and irritated. "Sergio, it's James. James Harrison." There was a brief silence. "James, are you crazy? Calling at this hour. What's wrong?" "Sergio, I need help. I have a small liquidity problem. I need a cash loan. I'll pay you back double next week as soon as my assets are unfrozen." There was a long sigh on the other end. "James, haven't you seen the news yet?" "What news?" The alumni group chat is on fire. Last night at 9, Davenport Holdings issued an official press release. The CEO of Innovatech has been fired for an embezzlement and ethics violation scandal. Your picture was all over it. It's already spread across LinkedIn. James felt his blood run cold. Catherine wasn't joking. She was systematically assassinating his reputation. I'm sorry, James. I work at a bank. I can't be associated with someone who's blacklisted by the Federal Reserve. Don't call again. Click. The connection was cut. James trembled. He dialed a second number. A business partner, Ivan, with whom he used to party. The number didn't exist. Third number, his mother in the small town. James hesitated. He hadn't been home in 3 years. He used to be embarrassed. He had promised to come back driving a luxury car and take care of his parents. Now he had to call to ask for a place to sleep. But he had no other choice. He dialed his parents' home number. Only the ringing tone sounded, unanswered. It made sense. Old people in the countryside go to bed early. James hung up the receiver. He felt the world shrinking around him. Catherine had not only taken his money, she had taken his name. In the business world, reputation is currency. Without it, James was just a middle-aged man with no special skills and a criminal record. Who would want to hire a former CEO fired for stealing his wife's money? Suddenly, the phone rang. James jumped. Who would call at this hour? Amber? Had she changed her mind? With a trembling hand, James picked up the receiver. Hello? Good morning, Mr. Harrison. It was the voice of Catherine's lawyer, Mr. Sterling. His voice was fresh and professional, as if he didn't need sleep. What do you want? James hissed. Just to remind you, Mr. Harrison, 9 a.m. is the final deadline. At 9:10, a garbage truck will arrive. We recommend you be outside the gate before then. We are not responsible if you are picked up along with the organic waste. You are demons, James whispered. We are only enforcing the law, Mr. Harrison, and you were the one who started the game. Have a good time packing your things. The phone hung up. James slammed the receiver against the base until it cracked. He screamed into the darkness, a scream of frustration that no one heard, except the silent walls of the house that would soon no longer be his. 2 hours remaining. 6 a.m. The sun rose. Its beautiful golden light seemed like a mockery to James. Catherine came down from upstairs. She was impeccably dressed in an ivory-colored pantsuit that radiated an aura of authority and purity. Her hair was pulled back in a modern bun, and her face was fresh. She didn't look like a woman who had just divorced her husband, but a woman ready to preside over a board meeting. In her hand, she carried a roll of black plastic. She threw it at James, who was sitting blankly on the sofa. The roll landed in his lap. What is this? James asked, stunned. Your new luggage, Catherine replied as she headed to the kitchen to make herself a coffee. The Louis Vuitton and Rimowa suitcases in the storage room were purchased with the company card, so they are registered as company assets. You have no right to take them. James looked at the roll of large trash bags in his lap. This was the final humiliation. Catherine was telling him to put his life in a garbage bag. You are truly cruel. Catherine. Hurry up, James. Time is running out. Catherine didn't turn around. Take only your clothes. Leave the expensive suits. I bought them with my money. Take your t-shirts, jeans, and underwear. That's the only thing that is purely yours. With indescribable frustration, James dragged his feet to the guest room. He opened the closet. There hung suits from Armani, Hugo Boss, and silk shirts. He touched them one last time. Following the instructions and fearful of the threat of jail, James only took his old clothes. Faded t-shirts, jeans that were now a little too tight, and an old hoodie he used to wear when he was just starting his business. He stuffed everything into the black trash bag. The crinkling of the plastic sounded incredibly loud in his ears. When he finished packing, he looked at himself in the mirror. He saw the him of 5 years ago. A poor man with big dreams. But now, without dreams, he was back at square one. He dragged the trash bag to the living room. Catherine was enjoying her morning coffee as if nothing had happened. Your watch, Catherine said suddenly, pointing to James's wrist. James looked at the Patek Philippe watch he was wearing. It was the only luxury item he had managed to hide that hadn't been confiscated yesterday. "This is a birthday gift. It's mine." "Look at the back," Catherine said nonchalantly. James took off the watch and turned it over. He saw a small engraving on the back case. But something was strange. It felt a little lighter, and the second hand was ticking in jumps. It wasn't the smooth, sweeping motion characteristic of a luxury mechanical watch. "It's a replica, James," Catherine explained, smiling amusedly. "I moved the original to the bank safe 2 days ago when you were drunk. I swapped it while you were sleeping. You didn't even notice the difference, did you? That proves you only cared about the price, not the value." James looked at the watch in his hand in horror. Like his life, even his watch was fake. He threw it on the floor, shattering the glass. "Keep it. Keep everything." "Satisfied?" "Immensely," Catherine replied, taking a sip of coffee. "Go outside and wait. You have 15 minutes left." The house was silent. A different silence from yesterday. Yesterday was a silence of tension. Today was a silence of peace. Catherine leaned against the door she had just closed. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and exhaled slowly. She felt light, the burden of pretending to be a fool for 5 years for the sake of her husband's ego, the burden of enduring the heartache of seeing his infidelity. Everything was gone. "Is it all over, ma'am, Missus?" Gable asked, coming out of the kitchen with a glass of warm water with lemon. Catherine opened her eyes and accepted the glass. "Yes, it's over, Mrs. Gable. The house is clean again." "Thank God," Mrs. Gable smiled. Her expression was one of great relief. "I've thrown out all the bedding that girl used. I burned it in the backyard. It made me too sick to wash it, ma'am." Catherine laughed. A free and fresh laugh. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable. You always know what I'm thinking." Catherine went back to the living room. She looked around. Certainly many things were gone. The original paintings were safely stored, the jewelry in the bank. The house felt a little empty, but this emptiness was a canvas for her new life. Her phone rang, this time her personal phone. The name Dad appeared on the screen. Catherine answered. "Hi, Dad." "Catherine, I heard the news. I received the full report from the lawyer. Everything was handled well. Are you okay?" Her father's voice sounded concerned, but there was also a hint of pride. "I'm fine, Dad." "Very well," Catherine replied. "Excellent. Well done. I'm proud that you finally acted decisively. That parasite needed a lesson. Oh, and the board has approved your proposal. Innovatech, which will now be called Fusion Tech, already has a new CEO, a professional from Harvard, not a con artist. Are you ready to start work as a senior advisor next Monday?" Catherine smiled. She saw her reflection in the large mirror in the foyer. She saw a strong woman, a woman who didn't need the approval of a man who was not her equal. "I'm ready, Dad. Next Monday, let's start a new era." Catherine hung up the phone, walked over to the large window overlooking the street, and peeked out from behind the curtain. The sidewalk outside was already empty. James was gone. His trail had disappeared into the cruel hustle and bustle of New York. He was just the past, a divorce statistic, a small footnote in the autobiography of Catherine's success. Catherine turned around and looked at the magnificent living room. 48 hours, she murmured to herself. She had given James 48 hours to leave, but in reality, those 48 hours were a gift. Catherine had given herself a time to forgive the foolishness of her past, to rise again, and to reclaim her crown. And now the queen was back on her throne. Catherine set down the glass and went up the stairs to the master bedroom, her own room. She had big plans, a new decor, a new business, and a life entirely her own.